Hello everyone, I'm your instructor Daniel Steele, and I'm coming to you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people here at UBC campus. In this lecture, I'm going to talk to you about the Ray and Cooper article from week 5 of the semester. So let's jump right into that. So the Ray and Cooper article discusses the right to a healthy environment and argues that this right should be given more attention within discussions of bioethics. So first, just a little background about what is a right to a healthy environment. What is this all about? Well, the background is in July 28, 2022, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution recognizing the right to a healthy environment. If you click this link, you can find more about that. I'll just just briefly summarize some of the main points here. In this resolution, the right is described as consisting of 6 substantive rights, which are sort of rights to particular things like safe climate, clean air, healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, safe and sufficient water, healthy and sustainable food, and a non-toxic environment. And in addition to those 6 substantive rights, there are 3 procedural rights, and procedural rights have to do with the way systems work. So first of all, there should be access to information. So for example, if a community is being exposed to, say, some sort of environmental toxin, that shouldn't be kept secret. There should be data. It should be possible to know about this kind of stuff. There should be public participation of communities in decisions that will affect their substantive environmental health rights. And finally, there should be access to justice. Access to justice means essentially that if a right to a healthy environment is not being upheld, there should be some possibility of seeking a legal redress or remedy for that. So one of the important things to keep in mind is that the United Nations doesn't have any power to enforce laws in member states. So that means that any practical impacts of this resolution are sort of indirect, and they can kind of be indirect in the sense that the fact that the UN has this resolution might cause countries to include a right to a healthier environment in their own sort of national legislation. And as we'll see in a minute, that's something that is, in fact, now, as of 2023, something that's the case in Canada. And then once you have some general commitment of a country, say in its constitution, or like in Canada in its charter, or some other kind of high-level legal document, once you have some commitment to a right to a healthy environment, that then can lead to sort of practical decisions that have some on-the-ground impact. And so that might happen as a result of the country sort of directly working through the consequences of, say, declaring there to be a right to a healthier environment and developing some more sort of direct regulations or laws that are intended to ensure that right. It can also result from people bringing lawsuits against the government and claiming that the government is behaving in a way that's not consistent, not compatible with the right to a healthy environment. And we'll see examples of that as we go along. Okay, so Ray and Cooper then, and here's the 2 authors from this reading, Keisha Ray and Jane Fallis Cooper, pictured over here on the left. They argue that environmental health and the right to a healthier environment should play a more prominent role in bioethics. And when they're talking about bioethics, from this article, it seems that they have in mind the sort of 4 classic principles of bioethics, and these are autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. Autonomy is, well, sort of the ability to make decisions about for yourself based on information. We kind of talked about that a little bit earlier when we talked about liberalism. Non-maleficence is essentially avoid doing harm. So, avoid harming patients if you're a physician. And beneficence is the obligation to help people, and justice is more or less what it sounds like. However, one commentator on Ray and Cooper's article suggests that public health ethics rather than bioethics would be a better fit on this issue. As a bit of background, this article by Ray and Cooper was published in the American Journal of Bioethics, and in that journal, it will publish articles as a sort of target, and then have a bunch of people invited to comment on that article. And so there'll be the main article with a bunch of short commentaries on it. And so one of these commentaries suggests that really, if you're thinking about environmental health and the right to a healthy environment, it makes more sense to think about this as a public health ethics issue rather than a sort of more medical or clinical ethics kind of issue. And this is actually a direct connection to something we talked about way back about in week 1, where we talked about differences between medicine and public health and how they matter for ethics. So I'd encourage you to sort of pause the video here and then go and look back at some of that material and think about how is it that the differences between medicine and public health matter here, and how public health seems more relevant to this issue than medical or bioethics. Okay, so we could do that, pause that, and now let's continue. All right, so one of the ideas that Ray and Cooper develop in their article is that upholding the right to a healthier environment is a fiduciary duty owed to children. So first of all, what's a fiduciary duty? Fiduciary duty means a duty to act to promote the best interests of another person. So this term comes originally from situations where someone is managing someone else's money. Like if you put money into your retirement account, let's say for your job, then there's someone who's managing these pension accounts. That person has an obligation to manage those investments in the way that's in the best interest of the people whose money it is, not in their own best interests. Similarly, for a physician, you have a duty to act in the best interests of your patient, and so on. And so the idea here is that society as a whole has a kind of fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of children. And then Ray and Cooper go on to point out that children, especially children living in poverty, are more likely to be exposed to environmental pollutants, more likely to be exposed to adverse impacts of climate change, and therefore are sort of at greater risk of these kinds of harms, and that therefore society in its fiduciary role of sort of acting in the interest of children has a strong moral reason to focus on the right to a healthy environment and make sure that that right is upheld. So notice here that this argument about children and their particular heightened vulnerability to environmental health impacts is a kind of an example of prioritarian reasoning. So kind of suggesting children, and especially children in poverty, are sort of in the greatest need for protection in this situation. Okay, so let's think then about one of the examples that Ray and Cooper talk about in relation to this, which is youth-led lawsuits related to climate change. And they give an example of one of these kinds of lawsuits, one that was filed in the U.S. state of Montana. There's a link if you want to learn more about that lawsuit. Very briefly, in that lawsuit, the youth were challenging a rule that had been put in place in the state of Montana, according to which the Montana Environmental Protection Agency was prohibited from considering climate change when issuing environmental regulations. And this group of young people from the state of Montana successfully challenged that regulation, that rule, all the way up to the Supreme Court in the state of Montana. There's also been a number of lawsuits, youth-led lawsuits related to climate change in Canada, and we can talk about some of these during the class. But here are just two examples you can learn about if you click on those links. And these lawsuits, especially I'd say the second one, since it's focused on the Canadian federal government, is likely to be connected to a change in the Canadian Environmental Protection Act from 2023. So that act was put in place, I think, in 1998 or 99, and it was revised in 2023. And the revisions in 2023 included adding a statement about a right to a healthy environment in the preamble to the act. So that would mean, for example, this lawsuit, which is going to be heard in 2026, could appeal in its arguments to this act in Canada stating that there's a right to a healthier environment, and use that to make a case that Canada needs to do more on climate change, for example. So another issue that comes up in the readings, in the Ray and Cooper reading, is the idea of environmental racism as a threat to the right to a healthier environment. Now, environmental racism, according to one definition, occurs when environmental benefits and burdens are distributed according to race. So, for example, let's say a racial minority group is subject to more environmental risks like air pollution and less environmental benefits, let's say like urban green spaces, and that this isn't just happening by accident or say purely for economic reasons, but it's happening in part because of a history of racism. And here you should understand history as sort of history like up to the present. So it isn't only things that happen in history, but of course things that, the effects of history that carry on to the present day. And this idea of environmental racism is very much related to the notion of structural racism, which we'll talk about next week. And in structural racism, racism is sort of built into a political and economic system and legal system. And you can find many examples of this. So for instance, there are many examples in Canada in which a First Nation community has been subject to pollution from some industrial facility, say for example a pulp mill or something like that, and has tried unsuccessfully to get legal redress for these environmental health harms from this facility, from this factory, and you get the sense in this that the legal system is just sort of stacked in favor of the interests of say the people who own the pulp mill or whatever, and this would be very plausibly an example of environmental racism and of structural racism as well. Okay, so. A final idea about the right to a healthier environment that's proposed by Ray and Cooper is the idea that if you're a physician and you're recommending that, say, your patient, say, get more exercise, for instance, that you should think about whether they have, an environment that's conducive to following that advice. So, for example, does this person have access to green spaces that would be helpful or that would facilitate regular exercise? And if they don't, that this is, there's this broader reason why someone might be non-compliant with recommendations. And this argument that Ray and Cooper are making is very much in parallel with a well-known definition of health promotion, according to which health promotion is the process of enabling people to increase control over and to improve their health. So the idea here is that if the right to a healthy environment is upheld, then that's going to improve people's ability to control their own health and to advance their health. Okay, so finally, as we saw in the discussion of the Liao article, one concern about rights is that rights can often come in conflict with one another, or they sort of come in friction or competition with one another. And so one objection that Ray and Cooper consider at the end of their article is that the right to a healthier environment might conflict with the right to development. So as an example, you might consider the South American country Guyana, which in the last decade has become a sort of burgeoning oil producer, an oil and gas producer. And so Guyana is a very poor country, but the idea of the government and of the majority of the population in Guyana is that thanks to these discoveries of oil and gas off the coast of their country, the government will get more money that it can use to do things like improve access to education, healthcare, and so on. So this might seem like an example where, on the one hand, there's a conflict between the environment and other kinds of rights, like a right to access healthcare or to have access to education. So Ray and Cooper respond that there really is no kind of conflict in these types of situations, and they give two reasons. Just a quote. One, there is no development on an unlivable planet, and two, developed countries must uphold their heightened duty to reduce their consumption and assist in the green transition. And so one of the things we can talk about are examples like this in class, and we can also consider examples in Canada where budgets for things like education and healthcare might depend on fossil fuel revenues, for example, in a province like Alberta, for example, or maybe Nova Scotia or other places. and we can think about this potential issue of competition or friction between rights. All right, so I'll see you in class, and that's it for this lecture.